absolutely no clue what I had to go through to get this. I don't even know what you're looking at this point. I don't know what you can see. Hopefully you can see me. I just want the video recorded at this point. Yeah. Okay, so chapter 3 is all about the Civil War. That's what basically we're getting at, right? In chapter 2, we learned all about the nation dividing a little bit and all the issues. So boom, chapter 3 is all about the Civil War. But before we can get into the war itself, we have to learn about the things that led up to it. So section 1 is all about slavery, states' rights, and westward expansion. So slavery is obviously dividing the nation. It's the main issue. Basically, we have the North versus the South, and both of them had different things going on that basically influenced the way that they viewed slavery. So for one, the North was industrialized. They had factories with paid workers, and they also have a more diverse population because of immigration, because basically people from all over, not the world, but Europe at least, were attracted to all the different opportunities that the North could provide. So people were moving there. Whereas the South was largely agrarian or had an agricultural or farming economy. One, we have the land for it. Two, like space-wise. Two, we have actual like good land down here. But then mostly because they have slavery going on, right? So the South was growing things like rice, tobacco, indigo, sugarcane, whatever else. But the number one crop, of course, is going to be cotton. And the way that they were able to have an agrarian economy is because they relied completely on slave labor. No one was getting paid to harvest all these millions of acres of land. So we start to have the Wilmot Proviso put in place to seek to limit slavery. Basically, with westward expansion, after the Mexican-American War, after the Mexican Cession, all that other stuff, the nation had to decide if they were going to let that land be free territories or slave territories. And the goal, of course, was to maintain balance between the free and slave states politically. The Wilmot Proviso was suggested, and basically, I think it was David Wilmot, Daniel Wilmot. I don't know. Basically, he suggested that slavery should not, under any circumstances, be in the Western territories. And obviously the North, who dominated the House of Representatives, they loved this idea because they would have more votes in Congress, whereas the South, which dominated the Senate, was like, no. So it didn't pass. It failed. Now, again, Northern industrialization versus Southern agriculture influenced the way that they viewed slavery. So the way that the North viewed slavery, well, Black people are still inferior, right? They still view Black people as inferior. Again, they're not racist. They just don't like slavery, right? So Black people are inferior, but slavery is morally wrong, right? There were laws put in place, though, to limit the rights of free Black people, because again, it's not like they're not racist. They just don't like slavery. And they also try to prevent further migration. So all that Underground Railroad, people leaving the South, coming to the North thing, yeah, they weren't fans of that. They would prefer Black people to stay down South. So abolitionists, as a result, were the minority, actually. Many or most white people were not abolitionists. I'm sorry, not white people, Northerners. We're talking about Northerners. Right. So some of the abolitionists, they do want a gradual end to slavery, meaning like slow, like we won't put it in the West, maybe one state at a time kind of gets rid of it, right? They're not ready for a sudden influx of Black people to start escaping to the North. That's not what they want. Others do want an immediate end or outlawing of slavery. But again, not to move to the North, because most Northerners were actually sympathetic to plantation owners, because basically they profited off of slavery too, right? They're making money off of the slave ships. They're making money off of the manufactured goods that they can turn cotton into, or tobacco or whatever else. They're making just as much money off of slavery as the Southerners were. And then the people who weren't, like the unskilled workers, they didn't want to lose their job, right? If you free all the slaves and they move to the north, now you have competition for jobs and they don't want to lose their jobs. So again, most Northerners are not racist. They're just anti-slavery to a point, but again, most of them aren't. Anyway, Southern views of slavery, pretty obvious. They loved it, right? They believed that God wanted Black people to be slaves to the white man. They believed that that was like his plan, right? And they also saw slavery as an important part of the economy, because again, this is what makes the world go around for them in the South, because they don't have to pay for anything. Boom, they're reaping in nothing but profits, right? They also believed that enslaved people were healthy and happy. In fact, healthier and happier than wage workers in the North. So they believed that they were doing us a favor, and it was actually a good thing, right? Because they treat us better than any factory owner ever could. So, yeah. But again, that was obvious. All right, boom, checkpoint. How did Northerners and Southerners view slavery? All right, so now we're on the election of 1848. So now we know how they view slavery, but it was never really a big political thing. But now slavery is actually becoming the main issue of the election, thanks to the Wilmot Proviso. So now we have supporters of the Wilmot Proviso form factions, and some of those factions formed into the new Free Soil Party. Again, these are supporters of the Wilmot Proviso. They basically don't believe that slavery should exist in the Western Territories. They nominated Martin Van Buren as their presidential candidate from New York. And their main goal was to, again, just keep slavery out of the West. The Whigs and the Democrats, however, not so forthcoming, I guess, on a stance when it comes to slavery. So usually they want support in the North and the South simply by just avoiding the issue altogether, right? Like, don't pick a side, just keep everyone happy, and there we go. However, the Free Soilers forced them to pick a side because they were clearly getting some attraction and some gains in the election process, and so now they have to pick a side. So instead, they both cop out and basically embrace popular sovereignty, which is the consent of the governed. And in this case, it's basically the idea that each territory should decide for themselves whether or not they want to be free or slave. So again, a cop out. The Whigs will nominate Zachary Taylor as their candidate. He is a war general, so that's cool. They know people like war generals. That's what Andrew Jackson was, and they felt like if Jackson could win, then Zachary Taylor could win. And he was also a slaveholder from Louisiana, so you know, you're kind of appeasing the Southerners quite a bit, even though the Whigs were predominantly a Northern party. And then on the other hand, Democrats nominated Governor Lewis Cass, who was against the Wilmot Proviso. But he made that known, but he wasn't going to say that he was against pushing slavery out or whatever, right? He just kind of kept it quiet because, again, popular sovereignty is what they were going for. And he is from Michigan, which is going to appeal to a lot of Northerners, even though Democrats were predominantly a Southern political party. So in the end, the result was that Zachary Taylor wins because the Free Soil Party basically took votes from the Democrats, right? Again, they're predominantly in the South. They tried to get a little, like, a few points with having a Northerner as their candidate, but a lot of the Northerners were drawn to the Free Soil Party, and so now the party's kind of split. And when you have people fighting over here, boom, they're not even looking. Zachary Taylor wins by default because he may not have had the popular vote, but neither did the other two candidates. So with this whole election, the Free Soil Party ended up proving that Americans actually do care quite a bit about the slavery issue. So boom, checkpoint, right? What role did the Free Soil Party play in the election of 1848? All right, so a compromise avoids a crisis because they're basically at a crisis now. So California statehood threatens the balance of power. So in our last chapter, we learned about the California Gold Rush and how that brought in a whole bunch of new people, like 80,000 people, boom, the state just blew up, right? So now they're applying for statehood. They want to be a free state. However, this would create an imbalance in Congress between the free and the slave states. So there's a few other issues that they had to keep in mind. One, Texas was already admitted as a slave state, and they are actually battling New Mexico for their northwest border. So that's actually another issue on top of that. And Utah and New Mexico were probably going to end up joining the Union as free states. So obviously the South is like, whoa, that's way too many free states. We don't want to do that. And then also slavery was about to be banned in Washington, D.C. The citizens didn't want it anymore. So that's another issue. And then lastly, Southerners also wanted government to be a lot stricter with the fugitive slave law that was already put in place in 1793. So good old Henry Clay from Kentucky, he comes in, and basically he is the Great Pacificator. Like, that was his nickname, the Great Pacificator. He just always seemed to solve the country's issues. And so he suggested a couple of things, right? One, suggested that California be admitted as a free state, as they asked, right? Two, popular sovereignty would determine the fate of Utah and New Mexico, since, again, we let California decide. Let's let them decide as well. And then also, it's not on your notes, I don't think, but Texas was going to have to go ahead and give up those claims to New Mexico about that border, and then just get $10 million in response. So that's actually the third point. The fourth one is that there would be a stricter fugitive slave law that would be put in place to appease the Southerners. And then lastly, that the slave trade would end in D.C. So not slavery. Basically, if you had slaves, you could keep your slaves, right? And if you didn't, you can't go buy more, and you also can't sell them either, because the trade is ended, but slavery is not, right? So those 5 things were his proposals that eventually would turn into the compromise. So Calhoun and Webster, they speak out about it. John C. Calhoun from South Carolina, he hates the plan because he feels like the South didn't get enough of a bargain in it, right? Basically, it's like 3 new free states, right? So the South doesn't like it. He threatens to secede if they don't get what they want. Daniel Webster, on the other hand, he was like, hey, you know what? Like, it may not completely abolish slavery in the West like most of the Northerners want, but at least it does cause for, you know, some abolition in a way. So he did support it. All right. Checkpoint. How did California statehood spark a new crisis over slavery? Y'all, I'm so over this. I just want this to be done. This is taking like 2 hours to record a 15-minute video. Anyway, okay, so last part. All right, so the Senate adopts the Compromise of 1850. So again, those 5 points that Henry Clay came up with, the Senate will go ahead and take, and they will adopt it as Compromise of 1850. Now, everyone's not gonna be happy, because people rarely are, especially in a compromise. The North, they still want no slavery in the West, so they're not happy about the whole popular sovereignty part, about leaving it up to New Mexico and Utah. But at the very least, they did get California as a free state, so the North did get something. The South, they still threatened to secede, because again, they don't like the whole popular sovereignty part either, and you know, just feel like they're giving up too much. But they do at least get a stricter fugitive slave law, and slavery is not completely banned in D.C., so they get a little something, right? So the main supporter of the Compromise of 1850 is going to be Stephen A. Douglas from Illinois, as well as the new president, Millard Fillmore, because Zachary Taylor died from pneumonia or something like that. And the Fugitive Slave Act, as I previously mentioned just before, is now put in place, which requires private citizens to capture runaway slaves and return them back to their state, which is a mess that we'll discuss in section 2. But yeah, so now with the compromise, the issue is solved, kind of, sort of, for now. All right, so last checkpoint question is, what were the provisions of the Compromise of 1850?